hold. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get ready to get started with our afternoon session. We've got, we're on item 8A, department reviews continued. We're on the municipal court. And so, Mr. Mayor, are we ready to continue?
Mr. Chair, we stand prepared to continue.
So, municipal court is actually in our budget book under general government, and I don't know that there's a specific, if there's an overview in the budget book, but we do have them as a line item on page 137, and we also have Judge Vigil with us this afternoon. So, Judge Vigil, welcome to our budget hearings.
Am I? Yes. There we go. Thank you. We've given you, and I handed out the best and most recent and updated version of our budget. And I really just basically stand for questions. The only difference that we have in our budget from previous years is we do have an increase to 4 items. Our pro tem judges, and those of you who have heard my presentations before, we have had a need to increase the time of our pro tem judges based on the new bond rules that we have. We also have an increase in our DUI defendants, so we're needing to get more ankle bracelets and more resources for testing the DUI compliance monitoring program that we have. We also need additional money for mediation. Because we are sending the neighborhood cases that are usually animal cases to mediation, and we didn't have enough money in last year's cycle to fulfill that commitment. And also, I think that's it, correct, Jackie? Those are the only increases.
Okay, thank you, Judge Vigil. So on the handout that you had, I might understand the first 2 pages, that's the entire proposed budget.
Yes.
So what you're requesting is 1.165394 as your budget?
Exactly. Okay,
then the question I have for the staff is, in our budget book, the manager's proposed was 1.746. So that's a difference of about $100,000. So do we accept the judge's 1.165 as opposed to the recommended 1.746. I'm on page 137 of the book. And if you look at under municipal court, the manager is proposing 1.746, but the judge handed us 1.165. And actually, it's a significant difference.
Mr. Chair, if you give me some time, I'll have my staff look into the difference. It may include things like the internal service costs for IT or some other costs that was included in the budget book but not in the judge's budget.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions from the committee. Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Judge. Actually, just a statement of appreciation. It looked clear to me, and I appreciate the way that you run the court. Huge amount of people that you move through, and everything I hear is that it's efficient and working very, very well. So
I'm glad to hear.
Very appreciative to you.
Thank you, Counselor. Appreciate hearing that.
Councillor Romero-Worth. Councillor Harris. And Councillor Rivera.
I'm not sure where it's in there on your projected budget, Judge. On the front page, there's the whole retirement, public or employee health insurance, retiree health care, all those that would be part of the payroll process that were left out. Or was that
In the
added
middle of the
somewhere else?
page, I'm sorry, please let you finish asking your question.
Just was that added anywhere else?
If you're looking for the PERA, employee health insurance, retiree health care, it's about halfway down the page, in the first page. Is that what you're asking?
Yep, it's in the budget for 17-18, but not included in the budget for 18-19.
Let me introduce Jackie Baca, who is the Deputy Court Administrator and also / Finance Director.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, we normally don't budget the salaries and other expenses related to that. It's finance that gets those numbers to us. So consequently, we would not have the projected in our budget.
So could that be the difference between?
Potentially be the difference. Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, we also have noticed that some of the budget numbers that we received via Judge Vigil were not the same numbers that we had originally requested. So hopefully that we can meet with somebody in finance to see where the discrepancies are. We noticed that once the judge had forwarded the information to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe what we can do is we can approve the budget subject to it not being in excess of what was, or do we want to postpone it and come back? Councilor Romero-Worth.
Mr. Chair, I'd rather wait.
Okay.
If that doesn't mess us up too much, just to make sure we don't tie ourselves into a knot here over.
Okay, when do we think we can have the two reconciled, the two proposals? When do we think we could have the two reconciled, what's in the book and what the judge is proposing?
Andy just went to go do that now. We should have an answer in a half an hour.
Okay, do we want to proceed to another department and then come back to
I would
the
like to.
municipal court? What does the rest of the committee feel?
Judge, excuse me, Mr.
Sure.
Chair. Judge, what does your schedule look like? I know, were you planning on being here for a little while, or?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, I did block some time. Normally, we're not at a hearing at the exact time that has been on the agenda, so I expected I have time.
Okay, so if we postpone it for a half an hour, an hour?
That would work.
Okay with that?
Okay, so we're going to postpone the municipal court hearing, and we'll move into the land use department, which is page 62 of our budget book. Okay, Ms. Martinez.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon our proposed budget for fiscal year 18-19. Mr. Chair, you spoke earlier about flavors of ice cream. I think I'd like to speak about Rice Krispie treats. Good for an afternoon snack, right? Actually, one of Land Use's newest staff members brought up something really interesting that I think we all realize, but we don't necessarily think about on a daily basis, and that's that there are so many land use needs across the city. When you consider that we manage everything from large-scale development projects to building permits to parking dogs, weeds, junk vehicles, all those kinds of things, you find that that our department activities really involve a wide variety of items and also an extensive coordination with other city departments as well as outside agencies. So our staff member described land use as the canvas upon which the city is built, and specifically he described it as the marshmallow to the Rice Krispie treat. Connecting trying to balance all the diverse and varied interests across the city, the various departments, and also the experts that come to us every day with different levels of expertise. In land use, we have been focusing over the last several months looking at our performance measures, trying to figure out how we can improve and do business better, trying to figure out how we can streamline our operations. A lot of this is tied to the implementation of the ERP system. But beyond that, we realize that our rules and regulations are extremely complex. We recognize that we need to streamline those somehow and figure out how to get to the simplicity of things so that we can better assist our customers and provide better business services to them. So we continue to emphasize how we can support economic development, especially at this time when we're seeing significant growth across the city. We want to make sure that we have timely approvals by all of our boards. We want to make sure that we can expedite review and issuance of all of our permits. And so as staff, we're constantly connecting people with all of these regulations that range from building codes to economic development incentives to transportation and sustainability initiatives as well. So our efforts to assist our customers while working through these regulations and ultimately decreasing permit times, we've been focused on that for the last several months because we know that's important to the community. And so we brought those down from what had been about 2 or 3 months down to 1 week for residential permits and 2 weeks for commercial. I think that's a pretty significant accomplishment to note. We've also done a lot to try to address our staffing needs. We had approximately 12 vacancies in the last 6 to 8 months, and we have worked really hard to fill every one of those positions. And with the exception of 2 individuals who will be coming on board in the next 2 to 3 weeks, all of our positions are filled. Beyond that, despite filling all of those vacancies, our workloads are such that they're at an all-time high. You've heard me say that when we go back to fiscal year 05 and 06, which was our peak period, we're actually 39% above that. And we actually have 10 less staff members than we had at that time. So while I'm not coming before you to ask for new staff at this particular point, I do want you to keep in the back of your mind that when we come before you at the 6-month review period, I do want to have you take into consideration some potential new fees for the department. They're not fee increases, but they would be fees for services that the city currently provides that match those that are provided by surrounding local governments, including Santa Fe County, services that they charge for, but we do not. We could potentially see an increase of about $740,000 to the city, which would make a big difference. And with that, at that time, we'd like to request 3 new staff members, which I'd be happy to answer questions about down the road. In terms of our current budget proposal, it's relatively straightforward. In fact, there's only a difference of $1,500 from our requested budget and the former city manager's requested amount. We have a combination of both increases and decreases within the individual divisions, but they balance out to, like I said, an overall difference of $1,500. Most of the requests that we have in place are for certification and for training for out-of-state travel, and a lot of that is to maintain our certifications and licenses that are necessary for the performance of our jobs. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions about the budget request, but like I said, the travel and the training are extremely important to us and important for us to be able to move forward and keep the city operating efficiently. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the request that you have on page 63 is more of a mid-year request. You hope the city will consider approving a plan to hire a reviewer, a planner, and a full-time attorney. That's what you were talking about for the 6-year review?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Councilor, that's correct.
Talk to me a little bit about your expansion and salary adjustment in HPD.
Actually, there are a couple of minimally proposed expansions, one of them for historic preservation and the other for technical review. We have 2 staff members who are currently leading those divisions who essentially act in the capacity as division directors, but have never been given the title or the compensation. And they've been in those positions, one for 10 years and the other for 11 years. So it would be a minimal increase, but it would just be essentially correcting their positions. We've certainly put in the proper job descriptions as part of the class and compensation study, but whether or not that will be reflected in the final outcome, I'm just not sure.
So it'll be a change in title as well as salary?
Yes.
And then if you, on page 68, requested personnel change summary, under A, kind of middle of the page, right above the technical review division. Can you explain that to me? It's a little bit confusing.
This is as part of the MPO division.
Right.
Okay, so the way that this worked for the last fiscal year, we had an individual in a senior planner position who was also working. He was only working for the MPO 25% of the time, and the remainder of the time he was the acting transit division director. So our goal is to fill that position in 2019 and make sure that we have a full-time senior planner, which is what is needed in that division.
So you're requesting that position come over to your budget as a full-time position?
Actually, we have the funding within the budget, because it's not just city funds, but it's federal funds that are associated with that as well. So in terms of that individual moving over to transit, I don't know how their budget was reorganized to be able to create that position, if you will, and to fund it.
All right, so you're fully staffed, and with regard to any personnel changes, all you're requesting is an expansion or a job title change and an adjustment to a salary.
That's correct.
So then on page 70, where you look under salaries, wages, and benefits, your current budget is 4.1, and you're requesting a 4.396, which is about a $198,000 difference. What's accounting for that?
Actually, that's a good question. That's something I'll have to discuss with finance, at least according to my calculations when we met with the mayor and with the former city manager. The numbers that we had requested were only $57,000 above the previous year's budget, and it was all for training, or primarily for training, but also for those staffing positions that I mentioned.
All right, so if we can have budget, take a look at that. Also under capital purchases, what do you use that $70,000 for?
Capital purchases, I believe those are the figures that are in there for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. When we created the short-term rental expansion, which was 3 new staff members, we essentially needed to create an office for them, which included computers, desk space, and associated equipment. And so I believe that's what that number is.
So you have requested a vehicle replacement also in inspections and enforcement division?
Yes.
Where's that budgeted at? I don't assume it's a big vehicle, but
If I could ask Amanda, she can probably tell me which line item it falls under.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, the vehicle actually falls under our vehicles line item. It's not specifically spelled out in this summary, but it does fall into inspections and enforcement.
All right, it's not part of the capital purchases, though.
No.
It's something completely different. Okay. But you don't have a vehicles, or this doesn't have the detail to have the vehicles in it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. It falls into more of an operating expense.
Okay. And what? It's just one vehicle, one set.
Just one replacement.
And what's the approximate?
25,000. Yeah.
All right. I think that's all I have for right now, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Romero-Worth. Yep. Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we'll probably end up having more detailed discussion when we get to the budget for the office of the mayor. But I did notice that in the personnel budget for planning and land use, we eliminate positions 1789 to allow for mayor staffing increases per AJ, Adam Johnson, and Brian Snyder. And actually, I don't know if I've captured all of them yet, but certainly this is the only one I've seen in planning and land use, but then we have a whole series of them, I think in Parks and Recreation. I think so. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that those drawdowns, if that's the right word, start with the planning and the land use budget. But then I will certainly have a more detailed discussion when we get to office of the mayor. Beyond that, I don't really have too much. I guess an observation. I think that my sense from being in the business and talking to people, as well as having been on the planning commission, people will talk to me, and my sense of things is that kind of plan review. In other words, on the building side of things, the plan review, building inspectors, permit issuance, those types of things seem to go pretty well. I don't hear too much. What I do hear a lot still is in current planning, regarding developments, rezonings, whatever it may be. And we talked about when we were at the Southside Library in the meeting there, and we looked at, the work that Land Use Department is doing on the ERP and all the metrics, if you want to call them that, really specific to the building department. And you said they were also some improvements scheduled certain for planning, the planning side of planning and land use. So I don't expect a full answer, but I guess I am looking for some sort of assurance that we're going to see some real improvement in the planning side of the planning and land use department. And I would throw that, I said current planning, but I'd also look at long-range planning as well. I've been continually frustrated by any lack of real movement on a general plan update, and I know that evidently some recommendations were put forward when Mr. Liming left, but I have no sense of what those may be. And so that, I think there's still some work to be done in the planning side of planning and land use. And it's a general observation. I'm not necessarily looking for a specific answer, but that's kind of, I think that's your challenge, Ms. Martinez. Okay.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Harris, just a couple of items on that. We said in the implementation of the ERP, we're really trying to figure out where we can streamline things. And actually the work that we're doing over the next couple of weeks is exactly about that. It's looking through all the business process workflows and identifying where we might have ordinances or other things that come in as obstacles that may delay things or cause problems, and thinking, okay, well, this is an option for us to go back and rework that ordinance or change it or get rid of it or whatever we can do in working with the council to make sure that we can clean those processes up. So it's active work that's happening, and you definitely will see some improvements. In terms of long-range planning, Yes, Mr. Liming and the Long Range Planning Subcommittee did put together what's called a land use and urban design study. I provided that to the mayor for his review. Would be happy to give you a copy of that as well. And I think we absolutely need to look at it with the council in terms of a possible path forward as a potential update to the general plan that I think can be useful. But I'd like for you to review it first, and then I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit outside of what we're doing today, but since I brought it up, I'd love to review it. I mean, updates to the general plan go back to my days in the Planning Commission, so this has been around for quite some time. Let me ask you this. As you've described your internal process for the planning side in relation to ERP, you know, we have a real professional class now who are just in the entitlement business. And are those folks brought in? Those are the ones who are on the other side of the table, you know, in DRT and other instances. Have those folks been brought in for that? Absolutely. Great.
Yes, they are active participants in every one of our work sessions.
Okay, that's great. That's what it's going to take in order to really improve the efficiency and the understanding. I don't really get any complaints about, this is the money issue now, I don't get any real complaints about fee structure. You know, and I know you've already brought up fee structure, and we're going to talk about it again in 6 months. It's just my observation, nobody's really talking to me about excessive fee structure, but I do hear about kind of inconsistent interpretation. You know, I know that the staffing has been an issue. If somebody's gone, there seems to be a real gap. So anyways, that is your challenge, and I wish you luck. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Martinez. Do you have current vacancies?
We have, well, they're not exactly current, but the two individuals in our long-range planning division are soon to be vacant. One individual, I believe, comes off of the books this next week, and the second one leaves at the end of this week. So those would be the two vacancies outside of the other individuals that we're hiring that will come on board within 2 weeks as well.
So you've got 2 new hires coming up?
Yes.
You spoke a few minutes ago about fees, proposal on fees that county charges that we don't charge. Could you just give me a couple of examples of those?
Yes. Councilor Lindell, some of the fees that this might include would be things for site inspections. For example, in the Historic Preservation Division, we do a lot of those. We don't charge a fee for that. On the planning side, we don't charge fees for pre-application meetings. So we bring in a lot of folks to those meetings, DRT members. So it's a big staff expense. But like I said, we don't charge anything for it.
Okay. One of your the items you just spoke about jogs my memory in my budget book on the bottom of page 64, having to do with reallocating funding from the State Santa Fe Certified Local Government Grant.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, what is that grant?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Lindell, if I could, I'll ask David Rash to speak to that.
Okay. Page 64. Yeah. Show it highlighted.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Lindell, David and I were just conferring to make sure we were talking about the right grant, but my understanding was that it was a grant that was given to us by the state specific to archaeology and related to archiving services.
Okay, so we have not, I don't need to get into it, but we've had not, it says we have not had time to work on that. I don't know what if the state is happy that we just reallocate it to somewhere else if it was for a specific thing, but that's departmentally something that you guys need to pay attention to, or we'll end up paying it back.
Yes, we do need to take a look at that, and part of it was a carryover, because I believe the majority of the project was completed, and so I think the funds were carried over. And so we need to do an evaluation of if there's any remaining work to be done, and if so, expend the grant appropriately.
Okay, the rest of my question, though, within that paragraph is talking about hiring a consultant to do historic cultural property inventories. And my understanding is that at this point in time, we charge those are paid for by the homeowner. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So are we proposing here to transfer those monies over into that fund and then no longer charge the homeowners?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, I might make a suggestion there, because if there's 40 of them a year and they're $1,000 each, that means we're taking on $40,000. And in order to, I understand the concept of undue pressure on the consultants for biased reports, but it seems like what we could do to have us not picking up $40,000 in payment would be for the applicant to pay the city, and then we hire the consultant and do it that way. I just don't see why we should pick up $40,000 worth of payment that we've typically been having homeowners pay for. So that's a point that I want to have considered, because I don't see any, I don't see the benefit of the city to doing that. The next thing is on the requested personnel change summary. I just need to say that two things. I'm not really comfortable with this being in the budget, because I don't think that that's what we typically, in my tenure on the budget, have dealt with. And I would be not comfortable moving this ahead until we did take a look at our class and comp study. I think that that's really important. I understand what you're saying, but we are just about to cross the line of the comp and class study, and I think that that fits exactly into that. So that's not something at this time that I could support. The other question I had was on the salaries, wages, and benefits. We're at a plus 200K. That's on page 70, about mid-page.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Lindell, that's another item I'll have to verify with the finance department, because that wasn't something that we incorporated in the budget.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'll yield the floor for now, but in terms of when it comes time to make a motion, Chair, I'm thinking that my consideration is to postpone this until we, approval of this budget, until we have more information on it.
Okay, let's hear from Councilor Romero Worth. Councilor, did you have anything?
Ms. Martinez, Mr. Chair, Ms. Martinez, so I just want to clarify, so about what is in this budget and what is not in this budget. So the attorney, the planner, and a reviewer are not here, but you just note that for us to talk about in 6 months, or?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Romero-Worth, the reason there's some discussion about it in this proposal but not actual numbers is it was something that I had presented initially to the former city manager and to the mayor, but also understanding that there's a new administration, not necessarily wanting to put forward new fees that hadn't been thoroughly vetted. I at least wanted to put the information in to make sure that we could have a preliminary discussion, just to let you know that coming down the road in 6 months, I like to discuss it further, and in the meantime, present the concept to our industry, present it to the Planning Commission, to other folks involved in the development review process, to get some feedback and see where they are. I'm not in the business of just promoting new fees, but if there's an opportunity to do something that can benefit the city as a whole and also provide some much needed staff for our department, I think it could be of benefit. And it's these same developers who are paying these same fees at Santa Fe County or in surrounding jurisdictions, so I don't know that it would be a significant hardship to them, but I'd like to have their feedback first.
Okay, and just to clarify again, so the fees that you will be proposing that we don't have any information on at this point would be used to pay for those due staff people?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Romero-Worth, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And just, I mean, as long as we're talking about aspirations and checking things out, can you tell me a little bit about what the department currently does in terms of, or the division, enforcing short-term rentals? And, you know, what, is there room for improvement?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Romero-Worth, approximately a year and a half ago, a little over a year and a half ago, the council took some time to go through the short-term rental ordinance and completely revamp it. In fact, what they did was they increased the number of permits available from 350 up to 1,000. Right. And so with that, with the changes to the ordinance, came the need for ensuring that we could provide for proper enforcement. And as a result, the council approved an expansion for our department of 3 new staff members that were specific to the short-term rental program. The program has been a real success. We have managed to get people into compliance. We have issued permits. Let's see, I think the number I got from staff last week was that we've currently issued, I believe, 873 permits. We have another, I think, 76 that are pending. And there are a few individuals who have not renewed their permits this year. So I think we'll see that we will easily get to the 1,000 mark, and that will be it for this year. But staff have been really diligent on the enforcement side, checking on weekends and actually finding violations of the program. We also purchased some software, hired a company to help us with the enforcement, where we provide them with a monthly list of our registered licensees, and they do a scrape, if you will, of the internet to go through and see all the advertisements on Airbnb, VRBO, and some of the other more popular sites. They do a comparison between our list and what they find, and if we find individuals who are not licensed, we can then go out and follow up on the enforcement. So it's been a really successful program up to this point with the changes. We gave a comprehensive presentation to the City Council just before you came on board, and if it would be useful to you as new members, we would be more than happy to provide that report again.
I may have it, but it'd be great if it's easy for you to forward that on to me. That would be great. Yes. I guess I'm also curious, so is there a way too that the public can be in touch? Is there a hotline or something where they can report, violations of this short-term rental? And are you looking at it? I appreciate that the division from where you sit looks like it's been a success, but from where I sit, I hear that the problem is still out of control at such a level that it's really changing neighborhoods. And so I guess the question is, what more can we do? What other tools do we have to, you know, rein this in a bit? So I'd be curious from where you sit, you know, what your thoughts are on that.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Romero-Worth, yes, from the beginning, there have always been concerns raised about how issuing even more permits does change the character of neighborhoods. And while it isn't a perfect solution, one of the things that we imposed was a requirement that you couldn't have two short-term rentals next to each other. They at least have to be separated by one residence. I know that that's not huge, but it was something to try and prevent the rentals from just completely taking over neighborhoods. This continues to be a nationwide problem that we're looking for solutions to resolve, but I know it comes up in the context of not having enough housing in the city, certainly not enough affordable housing, and so that is a problem that we do still need to address and could be a really important follow-up matter.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, you know, to me it's, you know, yes, 300 to 1,000 permits, you could quibble that that's, you know, too many permits, too few permits, I don't know. What I'm concerned about in particular is those operating outside of the permit, and that we're doing enough to, you know, clamp down on those who don't have permits. I guess that's where I'm curious what our efforts are on that side, and whether there's more we can do to combat this.
There is always more that we can do, and like I said, we do send staff out on the weekends to look for some of these properties. We do get reports from the general public, whether it be through the CRM system or folks just calling into the office to let us know where they think they know of a short-term rental that doesn't have a license, and so we do follow up on those.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, if there's a way to enlist the public in that help, I think that might be useful, and I'd also be interested in, you know, moving forward, just other ideas that you have about what we can do around this. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so I have some comments. First of all, starting with the beginning of the document on page 62, compared to other departments and given the size of this department, and this is probably more for the mayor and the manager, I think we need to take a look at the land use department as far as the number of divisions, the functions of those divisions. But for example, we've got a historic preservation planner supervisor, then we have a technical review engineer supervisor. Looks like they're two separate divisions. Long range planning division director, inspection enforcement division director, current planning division director, building permit division director. So it seems like an awful lot of divisions for this size of department. The other thing is, like Councillor Lindell, I don't want to be looking at salary adjustments for one or two individuals in a department. I think that's something beyond the class and comp, which I agree with. I think that's more of a management type of decision that needs to be made, whether or not there should be adjustments within departments, as opposed to the finance department coming together and saying, yes, let's approve this salary adjustment. Well, what about this other one? I'm sure there's lots of salary adjustments that throughout the city that need to be made. So I think that's something that you could actually take a look at as our manager, and whether or not there's I mean, obviously there probably is a process or a policy that needs to be followed before salary adjustments are given. The other thing is, as far as I appreciate the heads up, Mrs. Martinez, regarding the additional staff and the fees, but I would ask that we strike that from the budget document before we adopt it, because I don't want to tie our hands and say, hey, well, 6 months ago you adopted the budget, and in that budget document you said we were going to get a legal person in land use, we were going to get a planner, and not just land use, but in general. I've looked for that language throughout the budget book, and I have struck through where I think things aren't appropriate for us to act on at this time. So if we can strike some of that language, not just from land use, but from other departments, if it's in there. As far as the fees, I think that's a much bigger discussion, and I don't want to be having that discussion in 6 months, if that's something that we're really serious about, I think, Mayor and Mr. Manager, that's something that you need to start looking at and working on since now. I don't want to be, I don't want a increase in fees to come before the Finance Committee in 6 months without any type of heads up or work. And then as far as expansions as a result of that, like I said, I think it's a lot more than just, here's a presentation in 6 months, yay or nay, Finance Committee. Okay? So, and then I too have big concerns approving the budget right now with salaries and wages being 4.1 million in the current budget and a proposal of 4.3. So I think we do need to postpone this at this time unless somebody from the budget office can explain to us why the $200,000 increase in salary and benefits, because I don't want to be in a position where we approve the budget, then all of a sudden there's an excess of $200,000 that they can use for salaries and benefits that we weren't made aware of.
There, in this budget, there is a 2% across the board pay raise
For this department,
for everybody, for all departments.
we went through the departments, we didn't see a $200,000 increase in salaries and
No,
benefits.
2%.
So are you saying that, so if you look at salaries, wages, and benefits, 4.198, the current, what the city manager is proposing is 4.3, 200,000. I haven't seen that kind of increase in salaries and benefits for the other departments, so why is this department getting an increase of $200,000 in salaries and benefits?
That I can't answer, but I mean, because there's always additions and deletions, but in this budget, we did budget for a 2% increase. Now, if they added a 2% on a $4 million budget,
84,000. 84.
Councilor Lindell, what was that?
That would be, 2% would be 84, approximately.
Not 200,000.
No.
and so if you just added 2 positions with benefits, you're at 400,000 at the
Right.
higher budgets. I'll need to look into it, but overall, across the board, there was a 2% pay increase built into this budget for all positions.
You're right, I understand that, but like I said, we're concerned that there's 200,000 more in salaries and benefits for the land use department
I'll look into it.
that's being proposed. Okay, anything else from the committee? Councilor Romero Worth.
So is that the first we're hearing about that there's a 2% increase in salary? I mean, I see on page 6, it says that the budget is presented with an additional 2% increase in line with long and short-term observations, but that it was going to salary. I don't know that I've read that or seen that. That it was going specifically to salary.
What, can you tell us where it says it, Manager Litzenberg?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilor, I was halfway in that conversation. Were you saying you didn't see where in this it talked about a 2% raise in the budget book?
On page 6, under financial budget assumptions, it says that the GRT, that there's a 2% projected growth rate over the current budget revenues, and that then the budget is presented with an additional 2% increase in line, so I'm assume that.
That's a revenue line.
That is a revenue line.
Right, I think the concern is that everybody is going to receive a 2% increase once this budget is approved.
I'm confused.
Mr. Chair, we're going to have to look into that comment because I don't know where it is written.
Okay,
here, and I don't necessarily
Councilor
feel
Lindell.
We have a 2% increase based on our negotiation with the union, and that could very well be what we're talking about here.
And as there's an equity policy as well, so if the unions were to get a 2% pay increase, all non-union employees would also share in that same increase.
So that's my point, is that I think that that's the 2% that is being referred to.
But that's been put in under the manager's proposal throughout the budget document in all the departments.
Correct.
Okay, but there's no narrative pulling that out. Seems like we should know that.
So if we can add that to the the narrative to the beginning of the budget document, just explaining that there was 2% that was negotiated in the previous year. And so for equity purposes, the entire budget was built with that, the 2% increase.
Mr. Chair, I'll confirm that that's indeed what's gone on, and if it is what has gone on, I'll make sure it's written inside this book for clarity.
Okay. So do we want to postpone this item until we get clarification on, or do you have the clarification?
Mr. Chair, more than half of that 200,000 increase is a reduction in their vacancy credit. Because they had filled positions, that means there's less there and they've spent more, and so it's higher.
So they're going to need the 4.3 is what you're saying?
Correct.
Because of positions they're filling or have filled
They've
over the
had
last
filled,
year.
and so their vacancy credit this year is less than it was last year. And so the total cost for personnel expense is more than, and then you add that to the 2% increase, and that's where you get your 200,000.
Okay, so it's a result of there being vacancies that have been filled.
Correct.
So we're assuming that because of the new vacancy rate, they're going to actually need 4.3 million to cover it for the next year, as opposed to the 4.1 they had this past year. Do we know how many vacancies that was approximately?
No, but we can get that information.
Mr. Chair, we had 12 vacancies at one point.
And you filled how many of those 12?
12.
So you filled all 12 over the last year or 2 years?
With the exception of the 2 individuals who are coming on board in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, so Councilor Lindell, do you feel better? Because I was concerned that
I feel terrific.
There's 200,000. Okay, so just for the record then, they're not going to all of a sudden have an excess of 200,000 in salaries and benefits that they're going to be able to distribute in salary adjustments and other things throughout the year?
We'll double check that.
Okay. So because our intent is that whatever we do approve for salaries, wages, and benefits is for existing salary, wages, and benefits, maybe a couple of vacancies, but not so that the budget's being padded, for example, so they can give raises down throughout the year. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I just do what I did with the police chief and use this opportunity to ask Ms. Martinez to talk a little bit about some of the questions that were raised? I don't want to delay us too long, but I think we don't get this opportunity too much to talk about some of the overriding issues. And Councilor Harris brought one up that was on my mind, and I thought maybe you could just describe a little bit, a couple of things, and that is when I was over in your office on Friday, we talked a little bit about the need to update many different parts of our land use operation, the code. Councilor Harris brought up the general plan. Maybe you could just do a quick review of how long it's been since we've actually done these updates to both the code and to the general plan, and how moving forward would make a difference in the work of the department, the department's ability to respond to people who are coming in the door looking for guidance from our staff.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to do that. For the council members in particular who are new, our general plan is extremely old. It's from 1999. So while the document itself is old, I think a lot of the concepts within it are still current, and we find that we have committees all around the city who are working on improvements to a lot of the general themes that are listed in the general plan, but I don't know if they're fully aware of that or not. I think you have groups like Sustainable Santa Fe that are working on different initiatives, and that's a big component of the general plan. There's a number of those as well, and so what I've said to the mayor is I think it would be a great opportunity for us to look at those primary themes, look at the ones that are most relevant today, and try and compile the work that all of our city committees are doing and put everything into one place. That very well may give us at least a starting point for an update to the plan so that we can then figure out where we go next. But in terms of our me speak to our building codes for just a second. We are current on those. We have adopted the 2015 codes, and that includes everything from general building to electrical, mechanical, plumbing. We have the most current codes that are adopted by the state of New Mexico, and so I think we're in good shape there. But when it comes to our land development code, we actually showed the mayor a document that we had going back to, I believe it was 1967. It was 14 pages long. And so we've moved from a 14-page document that probably was sufficient at the time to well over 400 pages now, where we find on a daily basis that we have conflicting provisions, we have duplications, other areas that just aren't clear or aren't applicable any longer. And so I think we really need to take a look at the land development code and do what we can to streamline it. I don't know that we could ever get back to 14 pages, but certainly if we could get it down to, you know, half or even less than that, I think we would be better off. There's such a thing in the planning and development world that refers to performance-based codes. And I don't know how familiar you are with those, but basically it's looking at trying to figure out how we achieve a particular goal or we achieve a particular intent, as opposed to being strictly prescriptive, which says you have to do X, Y, and Z. This is common in building codes as well, and so I think it's important to note that we all are trying to achieve the intent of the code, and we don't necessarily always have to look at the strict black and white letter of the law. I'm not trying to say that we should circumvent the codes, but I think there are ways of achieving what we want to, and I think that if we can figure out how to do that at the management level and then teach our staff to do the same, I think we'll find that we'll streamline a lot of our operations and be able to get things through faster, be able to make administrative decisions as opposed to having to take every single thing to a board. We know that there are certain cases that automatically get approved every time, so there's no reason why we can't change the code to allow for administrative approvals in-house. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and things that I think we can achieve pretty quickly. It's just a matter of taking the time to sort through those codes, figuring out what can be eliminated, and it's a very high priority to me to make that happen, just because things can get so complicated and get strung out for such a long period of time that it drives staff crazy, it drives the development community crazy, and so I think we need to do business very differently.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. Lisa, when you said you filled 12 vacancies, when were those filled?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Rivera, those have been filled over the last 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months. So the question about, or the comment about vacancy savings, whether you have a vacancy or not, you still budget for it, right?
Councilor, yes.
So the budgeted amount in 17-18 was $4.198 million. Your vacancy savings is seen in your actual, is that correct? So instead of spending $4 million, they've spent $1.95 to date. Is that correct? And I'm on page 70. So even though we're almost towards the end of the fiscal year, they haven't even spent half of what they were budgeted.
The actual number is through December 31st.
This is through December 31st.
Correct.
So almost.
So it's half a year.
Okay. It still doesn't, I don't understand the vacancy part of it then, how if you budget for it and it's mixed into the budget for 17-18, how that would change significantly for the proposed budget unless people were hired at a higher rate than was initially budgeted.
The 4.1 million for this current fiscal year is really, say, 4.5 million minus the vacancy credit. Whether the vacancy credit or not is achieved is another matter. It's a budget reduction. So if they hired all of the people on the first day of the fiscal year, they would have spent the entire 4.5 million, and there would be a $400,000 shortfall because we deducted 400,000 from that, the actual what would be spent if all the positions were filled. And
Sit down, you're gonna have to draw me a cartoon picture, because, All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee? Councilor Lindell.
I'm going to move to postpone approving this until we have the requested information.
Okay, there's a motion for postponement. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the item's been postponed. Municipal Court, do we have an update, Mr. Manager, regarding the information?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my suggestion, we don't quite have the answers that we'd like to make sure that you all are able to make a good decision. And so my suggestion is we delay that as well until Wednesday. Until Wednesday, okay. Is Judge Vigil, can you come back on Wednesday? Is there a time that you prefer? Is it morning's better for you, or what's better for you, Judge?
Well, I'd like to be able to say I would like to accommodate everybody's schedule. My schedule Wednesday is very, very busy. I have arraignments all morning. I do video arraignments during the lunch hour. Then I have pre-trials in the afternoon. But I can get a pro tem in if you all decide a time that would work for everyone that needs to meet on this. I have enough time to try to call someone to fill in.
Okay, so we are scheduled for Wednesday. I would just ask the manager to arrange with the judge the time that works for both of you for Wednesday, and then just let us know what time it'll be on Wednesday. So if you can work that out with Judge Vigil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, councilors. We look forward to coming to a good resolution that we can bring before you.
Thank you. Okay, we're on the Parks and Recreation Department budget, and that would be page 72 of our budget book.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Finance Committee. My name is Rob Carter. I'm the acting Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Santa Fe. In our department, we have, at the present time, 5 divisions: an administrative, the Genevieve Chavez Community Center, the MRC and Golf Course, Fort Marcy, Salvador Perez, and the Parks Division, approximately 195 employees. As one of the questions that's always come up lately with our new mayor is how we meet the 3 top priorities, and basically Parks and Recreation meets all 3. We are user-friendly. Customer service is #1 in our book, and we try to make sure we get back to everybody right away. Sustainable, part of our slogan is play, explore, preserve, because that's what we want to try to do is have sustainable parks as well as facilities, and to be very family oriented. There's no doubt that we are. With that in mind, I can tell you that we have a couple things in the new budget. The first one is a recreation plan. Approximately about 2 years ago, the city manager and I, as well as both of my recreation complex managers, sat down, and we have begged, borrowed, stealed, pretty much pulled our hairs out, and have finally come up with what we have recommended this year, which is a recreation reorganization that basically will save the department and the city approximately $18,000 a year in salary and benefits. This includes taking and developing a recreation section so that we can join both GCC, Fort Marcy, and Salvador Perez as one recreation section and not have them separate. Over the last 3.5 years that I've been here, we seem to have established years before a hierarchy where Genevieve was way above how Salvador Perez and Fort Marcy were treated, to the point where we asked an employee at Salvador Perez to go over to GCC to work because we needed someone to fill in. He said, "Oh no, I was hired for Salvador Perez, I'm not going over to GCC." So with this new plan, we hope to streamline the department so that we do a lot of cross-training where staff can work at any of the facilities that we need. We're also looking at hiring from the savings a full-time outdoor recreation coordinator so we can get back into the outdoor recreation area, including family and children hikes, nature hikes, getting back to nature, and those type of programs that at the present time, when we lost the last part-timer that we had, we really haven't been. We continue to work hard and grow, working with the community. I believe this will be our second year with summer concerts at Swan Park, which is a new idea, as well as there's been talk about doing a movie in the park event as well. Other than that, I stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Okay, Councilor Romero-Worth. Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Well, most of my questions are kind of detailed questions. I mean, for instance, at GCC, we have a contract for Kiers, for $100,000 for quarterly of pigeon droppings removal, which is a problem I pointed out at Fogelson. You can walk in the doors here if you're headed to land use, and you'll see it there. So, I mean, how is this contract structured? That's a lot of money for pigeon droppings, to tell you the truth.
So
it needs to be dealt with, because I pointed it out elsewhere. But again, I don't know if there's a flat contract or per visit. How is this set up?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, last year the staff had gotten a company to come out and clean the pigeon droppings off the roof for approximately $14,000. Through conversation, I discovered that when they cleaned it, they just actually washed it off the roof. So there we have a question on environmental health. So this company is approximately $25,000 a visit. They will actually come in, remove the material without dumping it off the roof, and take it and deposit it in the landfill after treating it. We asked for 3 bids. This is the one that's the lowest in dealing with that situation, as it is a hazard to just wash it off into your environment.
So you did bid it out?
We asked for quotes from 3 different companies, yes, sir.
All right. So next one, is it necessary to rekey the building, the entire building? We've got $25,000 in there to rekey the entire building.
At the Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, it is our feeling with the amount of turnover that we have seen at the Genevieve Chavez Community Center, and also to keep up with the report that was done on the fraud report, it is best to have a key fob system to enter and exit the building safer, and not have a lot of keys out there where that people can actually take and have made copies of and be able to enter our building. So at one time last year, we discovered a volunteer who was, or 2 years ago, that it was given all the keys to the building, which shouldn't have been done.
Right. So it's a fob system, not a key, not a call it a mechanical key.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, that's correct.
Your corporate users fees are down from $90,000 to $50,000. Any idea what's going on there?
In which one?
Well, again, I mean, I'd have to, flip through a lot here, but I've got a note here that the corporate users' fees are down from 90,000 last year to 50,000.
Just mainly marketing right now. We do have an agreement right now that we have with St. Christus that they give us $5,000 a year towards our advertising, and in turn we give them corporate rates for their members. But just not a lot of corporate memberships we're seeing this year as we have in the past.
Well, that's something I think you should look into. That's almost a 50% reduction in, I think that just in terms of our business communities, I think they're a little bit, fairly healthy financially. And so I'd want to know if they're not so healthy and reducing for that reason, if they are not satisfied with the facility, is something I think you need to look at.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, we can work on that. We can get with our marketing staff and possibly do some new marketing for the businesses in the area to make sure that they're aware that there is a corporate rate for the Genevieve Chavez.
Special league revenues was $70,000 last year. It's zero this year. What's going on with that?
I'm going to ask Liz Roybal, our recreation complex manager, to come and answer that question for you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Councilors. I hope to speak effectively to this question. I've been assisting with the Chavez Center, but I'm not absolutely sure. My first guess is that it is special leagues for camps and leagues, and we did have some instances where we could not have our camps and leagues due to a professional services agreement that was implemented by the city manager. And this created, it was at the time requested as to get into compliance, financial compliance, but it created a big hinge, if you will, for many people who were officiating for us, where all of a sudden they had to provide us with insurance, business license, etc. So a lot of those folks chose not to participate, and we really had a difficult time recruiting and retaining sports officials in all of our leagues and our camps. I would say we lost about 70% of our officials for all of our volleyball, basketball, football, soccer, and then we run them from Pee Wee League to adult. Volleyball is co-ed, adult, women's. So there's many, many leagues that we absolutely need these officials to come on board with us. And I believe that's what the reason for that was.
Chair, I'm going to yield for someone else. I've got a few more, but I'll yield.
Okay, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. Like Councilor Harris and Councilor Romero-Worth, the $100,000 to clean the roof, I get it that it's gross and it's disgusting, but boy, $25,000 a visit, that's a lot of money. Have we investigated any ultrasonic or other ways of discouraging those varmints from being on that roof?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, we've been looking at this with not only with our IPM manager, but also with facilities over the last 3 years, and this seems to be the best. I should note that part of the problem that we've been facing is health within our building, because certain items get sucked into the air vents from these creatures that live on our roofs, which is also making it unhealthy for the people that use it. We have looked at everything, including facilities, as actually looking at a proposal to put some type of a dome roofing in there to try to keep the animals from landing and nesting on the. But as of right now, but we've tried everything from air horns to spikes to, there was one year they put in a material that actually was supposed to keep them off the roof, and it didn't help.
Okay. A second question that I have is, and this will also include finance. You've got $98,000 of expenses at the Chavez Center for $45,000 in credit card fees and $53,000 in cash and check transaction fees. I'm unfamiliar with check and cash transaction fees.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chairperson, Councilor Lindell, those are figures that are plugged in by finance, so we really don't have much control on that based on years of history.
Okay. I would just make a side note with finance, that in going through all the numbers through this budget, we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in credit card fees, and I would think that we could negotiate a little bit better percentage than what we're paying right now, because we are paying. Yes, Mr. Carter?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, I was just told this is the money that is paid out to ActiveNet, which is presently our registration program for all three centers. We are proposing this year, in this year's budget, to actually go to another program that'll basically, the initial will be $25,000, and after that, you will see this fee drop, but because it hasn't happened yet, we had to go ahead and budget for it this year.
That would be good. Have you purchased, or do you have within this budget monies to purchase software for doing our leagues through software?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, we've actually in the process of going forward with that right now. Staff have already had their beginning meeting. They'll go through several online trainings, and this will be implemented before the end of this fiscal year. We're going with a company called Community Pass, which is the company we're hoping to go with in the future for registrations. This will allow not only permitting to be able to pay it online, but also for leagues to be able to pay online. And then hopefully as we move forward with a new system that we've recommended for next year, you or anybody else can also register for classes online and pay online.
Okay, my point though really is about scheduling leagues online and making sure that that's all done instead of somebody sitting down with a yellow pad and trying to figure out who gets to be on this field at this time and that time, that we have a software program to do that.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, that's correct. And that's Community Pass, and the staff that'll be working on that will be not only Barbara Lopez, but also Greg Fernandez, Philip Montano, Jerry Schilling, and Dax Roybal. So they will all be doing all of our leagues on there, as well as the ones in our parks. And all that Barbara will be taking on will be the parks. And this way, we won't overbook or anything any of our fields or uses.
Okay. On page 76, under requested personnel change summary, you say, yes, we are proposing a parks reorganization plan.
And with
begs the question, where is it?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, I'm going to ask Richard Thompson to come up and address that for you.
Okay.
Chairman Avetta and Councilor Lindell, we were in conversations with Brian Snyder regarding two changes to personnel. In our initial meetings over the budget, we were told that we would not be allowed to enter expansion requests, and this had already been put in there erroneously. So there is no reorganization plan, there is no expansion to our personal services budget.
Okay, so this needs to be removed from the budget book?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Still on page 76, are any new costs other than inflation included in this proposal? Says yes. Division requests a mobile application for work order tracking, cost center accounting, and asset management. I guess my question on this would be, is this part of what would be, would this eventually be part of the ERP that we're implementing right now? Are we sure that the ERP does not encompass this?
Chairman, I bet Councilor Lindell, no, this would be separate from the enterprise-wide resource planning. This is a $15,000 per year mobile application so that we can capture baseline data to assist us in the results-based accounting. We have to have baseline data about what it costs to do certain tasks in certain specific locations. And at present, we don't have any way to capture these costs. And this was a relatively inexpensive solution that will be replaced by the enterprise-wide work order system that will integrate with Kronos, financials, and other accounting softwares. So this is simply for the division to catch up on baseline data.
Okay, I know that in Shirlene's division, they have a program that clearly I don't know how it works, but I think that you have a locator within program that they have that allows them to know where any truck or any work crew is, you know, the specifics of all of that. Do you have a program like that? Maybe sure. I know that she's not in your division, but is that true? Am I imagining that?
Mr. Chair, Madam Councilor, yes, we have a cloud-based mobile phone application that uses GPS technology to track where vehicles are at all times.
And is that a program that you pay a fee for every year, or is it an app?
It's an app. So it isn't a program that is downloaded onto the computer. It's all cloud-based, and you log into a web dashboard.
Okay, thank you. So I'm suggesting that maybe some conversation amongst divisions that might be helpful to you.
Chair Abetta and Councilor Lindell, it would not be free. We have had this conversation before. It is installed in the trucks themselves. Ours will be a phone-based app. So we will have a location of where the work is actually being done, but we won't actually track vehicles moving down streets. But theirs is a route-based, so
yeah, I understand that
so
part.
the truck does the work, but we'll be tracking the work of employees.
Okay, so let's move on to the elephant in the middle of the room here. Lifeguards. All I'm going to say is I'm not really asking questions. All I'm going to say is that problem has to be solved, and it has to be solved soon. Whether every person that works in a rec center has to be trained as a lifeguard so that they can do that job if we don't have lifeguards, whether we have to, through our comp study, figure out a way to pay lifeguards more. I'm not proposing that I know what the answer is, but what I do know is that if you sit in one of these chairs long enough, you will have a lot of emails about lifeguards and pools being closed and pools not being open. And I don't have the answer for you. That's not the work that I do. But I know that we need to have an answer to it sooner rather than later. So that's more than almost anything else that I see with how this budget is affected. That's one of the top things on my list. It just seems like we've struggled with this and we've wrestled with it, and it's got to be fixed.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, I will let you know a couple things. One of the things that we've decided and what we're working on now, and also with our HR department, is basically the promotion is, are you a good swimmer? If you are, we need you. And we will hire you and we will train you to become a lifeguard with the city of Santa Fe. So that's how we're promoting to try to get more lifeguards in here. One of the biggest stepping stools is the pre-test that the American Red Cross requires us to do. And if you cannot swim 500 meters in breaststroke and in elementary front stroke, if you cannot dive down 14 feet and get a brick off the bottom, come back up and swim over to the side in a certain amount of time, and if you can't tread water for 2 minutes without using your arms, you don't qualify to be an American Red Cross certified lifeguard. So we have to have proficient swimmers. But that is what we're working on now. Yes, I truly believe and I truly hope that with this new compensation study, we can pay our guards the money that they deserve so we can retain and get them.
On that point, Councilor Lindell, are you looking at all to the swim teams and clubs to, I mean, at least in the summertime, I would think they might be looking for a summer job, and they certainly, I would think, could do all those things. And I can say that when I was growing up, I was a lifeguard, and that's how I spent many of my summers. So it seems like they would be a natural pool for you, have you, no pun intended. And I'm just curious if you've tapped into that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth.
I trip over it all.
I'll get there. We actually, I'm going to ask Liz to step in and let you know, but we have talked to all of our swim teams, including our school systems. I was told last Thursday at my biweekly meeting with the city manager that one of the members of the Otters who swims at Salvador Perez has applied to be a lifeguard. But I'll let Liz kind of address, because she has been working really hard on trying to find the staff as well.
Mayor, did you want to comment first? Go ahead.
Chairman Abeyta, councilors, mayor, and city manager, I'm glad you brought up the elephant in the room, SIG, Councilor Lindell, because this has been an ongoing problem since about 2013, where we really started to see our program digressing. And what I can say is that for whatever reason, the value of the aquatic program at the city of Santa Fe was just not valued. When the pool manager resigned, the job was eliminated. We had 2 assistant section managers in the pools that were frozen for 2.5 years. We currently have a pool supervisor frozen at the Chavez Center. From when I was the division director at the Chavez Center in 2006, we had 28 aquatic staff at the Chavez Center. If you've seen that place, you see we have 4 areas of water. We have to assign guards by ratio. So it's a 40-to-1 ratio. At the outdoor pool, we do 25-to-1, because why? It's a safety-sensitive job. So since that time, we've gone from 28 aquatic staff at the Chavez Center to 15. We have had gone from 12 at Salpetis to 6. We've gone from at Fort Marcy from 12 to 6. And you tell me how you keep those operating hours and all those venues open when your program staff has been slashed to that level. And that's the truth. The other piece is that we don't pay enough. We are competing with the private sector. Los Alamos and Poaki Pueblo. The outdoor pools pay between $13 and $15 an hour for a lifeguard. We pay $11.49. That means you're safety sensitive, you're drug tested. You have to go to 7 a.m. in services. You have to be responsible for people's lives. You know, there's a lot involved. The other thing that affected the attraction to being a lifeguard is the living wage. The living wage was a good thing for everybody in Santa Fe. But why would I go be responsible for somebody's life, get drug tested, when I could go work retail, get the living wage, or waitress, do food industry, and get the living wage and tips? That's our competition, folks. That's the bottom line. We certified 11 people recently for lifeguards. We got 1 applicant. Why? When I asked them, I went to Sunrise Springs. I went to Casa Solana. I went to the Country Club. I went to El Gancho. So that's our struggle. We don't have the staff. We are open 100 hours a week at Chavez Center, 80 hours a week at Salpe and Fort Marcy. BC Pool, 57 hours. I have 2 applicants for Bicentennial Pool. I need 8. I need 10 lifeguards. I need 3 supervisors. They're not there. We have to make some hard decisions. That's the truth, and thank you with respect.
Thank you. Mayor Weber.
I wanted to come back to the point that Councilor Romero-Worth made earlier about our cooperation with the school district, and this is an area where I was in touch with Superintendent Garcia, and she indicated that they had a number of young people, 5 or 6, who were qualifying for lifeguard certification and would be available, at least on paper available, to provide that kind of coverage and to have the kind of summer job that you had. And so it's not a fail-proof, a fail-safe solution, but I think there are ways we can begin to address it with these young people stepping up, as you did when you were that age. It's not an easy job. I think it's absolutely true. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of hours. It's not a lot of money. But if you're a swimmer and you like being around the pool, or you're a swim team member, and that's something where you are anyway, you get a chance to do your workout and then be a lifeguard, I think that's a pretty normal path that a lot of people have taken. And so I hope that we can continue to work with the school district and find those young people who want to qualify. The schools will help us, and hopefully we can sign up. If there were 5 or 6 that the superintendent indicated might be available, my hope is we can get some of those on the job very quickly and speak to the elephant in the pool.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Lindell, did you have any other questions?
Can I, just one more thing on that?
Sure.
You know, and I think the other thing we need to do is we need to make it cool, you know, to be a lifeguard. I mean, it certainly was in my day. Rather than, you know, talk about how hard it is, how much responsibility it is, why would anybody want to do this? Let's make it cool. I mean, it's an amazing, to be a lifeguard is actually an amazing thing. And so let's talk about it in a positive way, and let's do some, you know, make our advertising so that it's a compelling thing to want to do rather than an enormous burden. So I just ask that we change that.
Yes,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell, any other questions?
No, it wasn't really a question. It's just a focus that we have to have. We have to figure it out, and we have to do better. And, you know, slashing positions and not filling them is not a way to move this forward. Whether you need to reassess where we put our assets and what our priorities are, if that's what needs to happen, let's go ahead and move forward on that and do it. Because I don't think anybody is interested in going through this month after month after month. And we have very active constituents that want to use these pools, and they're being denied the use of this asset for what is, to me, not a good enough reason. And like I originally suggested, I think there are people at the rec centers that could be cross-trained. That may not be their main job, but in a pinch, you can be certified and fill in. So that's my thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you know, we've talked about the elephant in the room. How about the one in the great outdoors, which is the medians? I assume, well, first of all, for the current year, I'd just like confirmation the current year that we've got the personnel and the budget in place to get the jump on the medians like we've talked about. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson?
Chairman, I bet Councilor Harris, yes, we did get a jump on the season. We started hiring in February. We do experience some loss of personnel through the season. So at present, we are again at a deficit of 5 total median workers, 2 laborers, and 3 maintenance workers.
Okay.
And these are advertised, and we have an list of eligible applicants, and we will schedule follow-up interviews and continue this through season.
Well, yeah, put that high on your list. We don't want to go through this season what we went through last season. And it's just, I'm sure you're aware, Mayor, in terms of how we demonstrate delivery of services and how efficiently we can act and deal with issues, medians throughout the city were a cause for concern and complaint all through the spring and summer, and we don't want that again. So what will be the approach for next year? Is it a similar situation? Have you budgeted for the types of positions to be in this budget, the proposed budget, for next spring? Is that going to be a similar approach?
Chairman Abetta and councilors, yes, exactly.
Okay. You know offhand how much that is?
15 employees, I believe it's $173,000.
Approximately 173, call it
For the seasonal employees, sir.
For the seasonal?
Yes. And then we have the 2 supervisory staff, a supervisor and a senior park maintenance worker.
Okay. And what about, you know, when there was also talk, it was really not set in stone that I knew or could point to, and maybe this is a CIP discussion, the approximate $1 million. Is that's going to be still showing up in the $1 million annually within the CIP discussion to start dealing with the medians on a more permanent basis?
Chairman Abetta and councilors, yes, that is in the CIP proposal.
Okay, all right. The trash cans that I've been looking for, that's CIP? Because this has been going on for a while. I expected to see those installed, quite frankly.
Chairman Abetta and Councilor Harris, we have a plan to purchase the cans. We do not have a plan to install them at present. We've had a loss of a supervisor, went to the MRC that led our construction team. We're moving that position to irrigation as we suffered a loss in that field last summer. So we will probably go to a small construction contract to install the cans on a time and materials basis, estimated $50 per can.
This is another health and safety issue for our staff that I identified almost 2 years ago, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Litzenberg, in your capacity. You can talk with Mr. Thompson. He'll tell you what I've been complaining about. It's just these old 50-gallon drums that will not accept a trash bag, so our people have to reach in to empty them. And it's a gross activity that that should be stopped, really, should have been stopped by now. So it's been budgeted in the past, and for purchase of the equipment, they're not here, and I guess I didn't hear anything about personnel. What I heard was, again, this is CIP for installation. You're not addressing it here for installation of the cans with the small construction contracts. Is that right?
Chairman, I bet and Councilor Harris, that's correct. It's actually not within the capital improvement program per se. It is a severance tax bond issue. It is listed in the CIP, but it's funded by the state. We have 2 years to do this. We did concentrate on the vaulted toilets, which we are trying fervently to complete that contract right now, at which point we will purchase the cans and then start putting them out on a park-by-park basis.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about the MRC. As you know, there's a group of advocates who've really been talking to probably all of us about the MRC and the soccer, and I'm talking about the soccer fields. And we're told there's a commitment from, well, we already know of a state funding stream that was implemented for upgrades to irrigation system, and that's pretty much complete, is my understanding. It's my understanding there's a commitment from Santa Fe County in the amount of $500,000 to kind of support this transition to call it a public-private, that's not quite accurate, relationship for maintenance of the soccer fields. What kind of conversation has occurred around this budget discussion as far as that initiative goes? Has there been any consideration on that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, actually it is a CIP question, and I have already put it into next year's CIP request to match the county's $500,000 that they are putting in. And this is not only to maintain the fields, but also to do other improvements out there as part of the master plan.
Right, lighting, and I'm aware this is the first step. So anyways, it's CIP. This is a CIP discussion.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, this is correct.
Well, we'll save that, but in your opinion, would this support, this relationship, be to the benefit of all leagues, including youth leagues?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes, I do. I believe for soccer in the city of Santa Fe, this will benefit all age groups as we move forward, because we all know that soccer is continuing to grow and we don't have the field space for them. And if our Pueblo decides to do something to the stadium or the racetrack, they will basically lose sports fields. So I highly recommend we move forward on this, and I've been part of this task force working with the county and with the soccer organizations.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor Harris, for bringing that up. Just of note, I did ask the previous city manager to put it on the finance budget as well, so we could begin that discussion and decide whether it was a CIP or potentially an expansion issue or a budget issue. He refused to put it on finance part of the discussion and kept it on CIP, and I'll just leave it at that since he's not here to really defend himself or answer about that. Liz.
Can I interrupt real quick? Councilor, on that note, would it be possible to fund it through this process so that then it doesn't have to be funded through CIP? Because then that obviously frees up additional CIP money down the line. Or is that too big of an ask?
Mr. Chair, who are you asking that?
I'm asking any one of you that wants to answer it. Can you find us $500,000 through this process, or can we, so that we can, like I said, fund it now as opposed to CIP with CIP?
Yeah, and my short answer would go back to something I said earlier, which is this has been prepared as a balanced budget, which means for us to find anything of that significance within it, we either have to find an additional revenue or decide what not to do that's listed in here.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we need to keep that in mind, especially as we look at numbers again for land use. I mean, there's a $200,000 discrepancy there. I see a reduction of 200,000 here, so I think we just need to keep that in mind. And maybe there's a combination where we fund some through here and some through CIP. I would really like to see that get funded somehow. Councilor Rivera, thank you.
Mr. Chair. Liz, can I ask you a couple questions again about the pools? And I truly appreciate your honesty and being just out there as far as, you know, what's gone on with losing positions. And so has there been any discussion about re-implementing some of these positions that were lost initially or that have been lost over the years?
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Rivera, councilors, I hope there will be. I have faith in this administration that they will realize that we cannot continue to operate that level of operation and hours.
I'm sorry, I meant, was there any discussion prior to these budget meetings
No,
about
sir.
reinstating any of those?
Councilor Rivera, no, sir. In the recreation plan, there was some discussion, and it's on the table, to incorporate some positions together for salary savings. But in terms of aquatics, no. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, we were going backwards, not forward.
Right. And it sounds like we're in a bit of a predicament now. So as part-time employees, they are safety sensitive because they're lifeguards, but are they required to do drug testing throughout as part-time employees?
Councilor Rivera, councilors, absolutely. They get random drug tested. I'm taking people on a frequent basis for drug testing.
And that's because they're safety sensitive. It has nothing to do with being part of the union or not union.
Correct. It's a safety sensitive position.
Okay. There was an email that was written to Councilor Harris and myself, and I believe the mayor, and it talked about shallow water lifeguards versus regular lifeguards that require less training, I guess. So those people that maybe can't dive 12 feet to pick up a brick and bring it back up, that there's a different type of certification that would then free up other lifeguards maybe for the larger pools.
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, councilors, that is correct. We have really been trying to brainstorm to resolve this issue. We're not sitting around saying, oh, well, we just don't have lifeguards. I think people were in better shape back 30, 20, 10 years ago, Councilor Worth, than the kids are now. But the requirements are substantial. You know, in a perfect world, yes, the managers could step in or other cross-training, but this is a different animal. This is a very safety-sensitive position. So let me answer your question about the shallow water certification. This was actually brainstormed by Denise Dominguez, who is our pool manager for Sal Pettis, Fort Marcy, and the outdoor pool, and she looked into it with American Red Cross, and we thought, wow, the light went on. Why not? We have 4 shallow pools. We have a BC pool, we have Fort Marcy, we have 2 venues at GCC where we could definitely utilize shallow water lifeguards. Unfortunately, and again, I'm just telling factual information, that was poo-pooed, literally. Like, no, that's not a certification. And we were adamant that, yes, it was a valid certification by American Red Cross.
Who rejected it?
The city manager and HR director. So, again, I think that's something we can bring to the table. I think a lot of kids would pass the shallow water certification, and absolutely not. We would never assign them to the big pool, the lap pool at Chavez Center. But we could certainly use them on a pool such as BC that's 3 feet to 5? Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, and I don't know what it takes to get to that point. Do you need approval from us? Is that something that you can just do? Is it the new HR director, whoever that's going to be?
It certainly is an option. Just like if people are going to be lifeguards at a beach, it's a different type of certification than an indoor or a 3 to 5 foot shallow water pool.
I think the manager, what I'm hearing is clear direction to start looking at that and maybe bring us something within the next 30 days as to here's the either pros and cons, or here's our recommendation of how we're going to implement that. Would you be satisfied with that, with Councilor Rivera?
I would if we were moving forward. I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're going to be in a world of hurt in a couple weeks. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. Rob, so why isn't it part of the budget to re-implement some of those positions that were lost in years past?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, it's just an interesting situation, and like, we don't want to disparage people, but certain recommendations were made to higher ups, and they were kicked back as saying, no, we didn't want to go in that direction. We are in the process right now of going back and recommending the hiring of a frozen recreation supervisor for Genevieve, as well as we just had a person who was on workman's comp that's going to become a registration records person, and then we'll be filling the other recreation supervisor that's been vacant for almost 8 months, where she's been out and can't lifeguard, basically because of her workman's comp. So both of those will be going to our acting city manager as well as to Mr. Bartlett to approve so we can re-advertise them.
Very good, thank you. On page 74, you refer to a recreation plan. Where is the recreation plan? Well, that was the parks reorganization plan. This is the recreation plan.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, this was submitted with a budget, so I'm kind of not sure. I'm looking at Bradley to figure out why you guys didn't get it, because we submitted all the paperwork to finance. We were asked that anything that was an expansion had to be moved on to you folks. So yeah, it was kind of my surprise when I opened up the booklet as well. I do have a little bit of it here. If you'd like, when we're finished here, I'd be happy to make some copies of it so you can review it. Basically, to give you in a nutshell, as you're aware, about 1.5 years ago, we lost a recreation complex manager at the Genevieve Chavez Community Center, as well as a recreation section manager. So through those two positions, I've developed a recreation plan to actually streamline the department so that we have people overseeing all 3 centers, and the bottom line savings was about $18,000 a year.
All right, I would love to see that plan. And then at the bottom of page 76 and the top of page 77, there's a question that says, describe the process your division went through to build a zero-based budget. And then it says, we received E1 and determined what worked well for us last year. We realized that in some funds, water usage was decreased. I'm not sure how that helped with a zero-based budget, or if it's just in the wrong place, or...
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, I think what that's referring to is we don't plug in our water figures that comes from the water department and gets put in by finance. Mm-hmm. So we noticed that there was a reduction in water at Salvador Perez as compared to recent years. And so we asked the question, and basically we were told just to leave it in there. Again, like I say, we might dump that pool once a year, if at all, because basically we recycle the pool water, and so unless we're doing a major fix, we don't refill that pool, just like we don't refill any of our other pools except for BC Pool. So the bulk of our water expenses really for the department comes out of parks. And that one we've basically dropped from 2.2 million the first year to 1.8 million. The figures, as I said, they might be behind in the payables, and that might be what is affecting, because based on what we saw in the E1, there was only $6,000 spent out of Salvador Perez for an $80,000 water bill.
And that's what you use primarily for your zero-based budgeting?
So we had to basically take what we put as figures for last year and use the same figures for this year. So I don't know why that was put in that way.
Okay. And then,
On that point, so just as a more general thing, I mean, that question gets asked on each division. What process did you use to come to your budget? Shouldn't we define a process by which we ask all these divisions to use when they come up with a zero-based budget? Because zero-based budgeting, by its nature, you're supposed to start from zero, right? You're not supposed to necessarily be going, okay, well, this is last year, it worked well, so we're just going to do it again. You know, it's the whole concept is different, and it's really interesting if you read through the book about the different processes. I've just, going forward, I assume you've noticed that too, Mr. Mayor.
Counselor, I think you're absolutely right about, thank you, about both the question and the answers. And I think what is going on here is a certain level of training and development between the finance department and the operating departments of the city, where having done some programmatic work to walk people through what it takes to develop a zero-based budget and what it actually means, as you point out, the effort then was to say, now report back to us what you did to implement what we worked on to do a zero-based budget. How did you activate the training and the process that we had worked with them, or that the prior finance director worked with them to develop? And so I think what's going on in this budget, as I read it, is a series of check-ins over what are your metrics for doing results-based accountability, what is your process for actually implementing zero-based budgeting, how are you utilizing the new system so that as we go forward, there's a greater depth of common understanding about how budgeting in the city will be done using this format. And I think it reads as if it's an essay question, but I think it's actually a kind of a check-in on, are we all on the same page? Tell us how you did it so we can be sure that what's going on here is matches what the training and understanding was at the beginning. I'm reading it in that as I said at the beginning when I tried to do some level setting remarks at the beginning of the day this morning, I think what we're seeing is the beginning of a new effort to standardize the way budgeting is done, but it is still very much unit by unit. It's the same way we build our website, which is everybody does their own version of a website, and then it gets aggregated onto a city website, as opposed to having a comprehensive approach to building a website. We tend to do things. I'm learning as you're learning, Councilor. We're both about the same number of days into our tenure. That historically, a lot of what has been done is to have very loose relationships in some areas and very tight relationships in other areas. And a lot of the loose pieces tend to be information aggregation or information data collection data aggregation, data reporting, whether it's on metrics or on response to processes, that tends to be outsourced to each division, each department to do its own way, as opposed to having a very highly standardized operation. Other things are very highly centralized, and so some of the questions that the Finance Committee members who have been here a long time are checking in on have to do with, well, where did this decision get made and why were your positions handled the way they were, which reflects this management relationship between the city manager and the heads of the departments. And so, again, this is a broken record for me. Councilor Harris is probably very tired of hearing me say it, but we're in a kind of a transition period in a lot of respects in terms of the structure and operations of the city. And what you're seeing here, I think the city manager's document that was in the front talks about a kind of a series of pivot moves over the last 4 or 5 years to try to take the city government from what had been a very outmoded set of activities and way of building a budget to try to actually modernize it, much as the ERP system is designed to modernize the flow of information and decisions across all the different departments. And it's very much a work in progress. So what you're seeing is, I think, an accurate real-time description of how far that transition has gotten at this point in time.
Anything else, Councilor Rivera?
Just one more thing on this plan that just came forward, and I don't know, City Manager, if you want to weigh in on this, but I think most of the time when we're handed something like this, it doesn't have names in it. This does have names with proposed increases and where people are going to go and how they're compared to other people. I'm not sure if that's something we want to do. I don't want to get in a situation where now we're approving something because we like whoever's there or we don't like whoever's there. So I'm not really going to look over that too much. I don't know if you want to pull it back or if you want people to keep it, but
you can take mine back.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I think that's a good advice to pull it back, and this is the first I've seen it too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to thank Councilor Rivera for that observation. I think, again, this is where we are in a transition period. We're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to recognize the need for change. At the same time, we want to respect the boundaries and responsibilities, just as the chairman and Councilor Rendell talked about specific salary increases for specific positions. It's a very dangerous, or that's an overstatement. It gets very granular very quickly, as opposed to looking at the budget at the level that we're doing today, where we're trying to look at programs, we're trying to look at expenditures and revenues. You don't really want, I believe it's correct to say none of us at this session want to be looking at individual employees and their individual compensation packages and attempt to have that be part of the budget process. So thank you for flagging that.
yes, sir. Thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I just want to comment that we spent a lot of time discussing this department's budget. I heard a lot about the history of the department, positions that were taken away. Of course, I get emails regarding the lifeguard situation. And it just puzzles me that we have a current budget of $18.3 million, and then with all of these issues and these concerns, we were presented a budget reducing it by almost $1 million, $774,000. And so I don't know what the thinking was with that. I look at salary, wages, and benefits. If you look at the history, we're proposing less by 100,000. If you go all the way back to 2015, we go from 7.9 to 8.8. The current budget was 8, and now we're only going to approve 7.8. So to me, there seems to be a disconnect. I know Mayor and Manager Litzenberg, you probably weren't, there wasn't enough time to get into the details of this budget. But again, I think that's something that I mean, usually I like when budgets are brought to us reduced by 200,000 or 700,000. Like, great, look at all this money we're saving. But having heard the discussion today, it's kind of alarming to see that, you know, we're cutting this budget by almost $1 million in this area. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, we don't have a second. Is there another motion, or do we want to have further discussion? Councilor Rivera.
So, Mr. City Manager, I know you're really busy, but in really learning a position that you just started in right before the budget process, and we knew these things were going to happen, but this is, in my opinion, a really sloppy budget, and I would like to see it cleaned up, and I don't know if you can help the division do that or have somebody help them do it, but from the recreation plan that we received needs to be redone and I think resubmitted, to just cleaning up some of the language in here, taking out language that refers to a parks reorganization plan when there is no plan there. Just need some cleaning up and some fine tuning. So I would make a recommendation, or I would make a motion that this be cleaned up and then brought back on Wednesday with the other two that we have coming back so far.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Second. Is there any discussion on a motion for postponement? Usually I know for a motion for tabling there isn't.
Could I just make a comment quickly?
Mayor.
I know it's your committee, but I feel as though we're all working on this in real time together, and I appreciate that opportunity. Mr. Chairman, I think you're right to look at the year-over-year changes because they're really quite dramatic, and it's hard to understand in some cases the logic of the changes over time. If you look at the expenditures in just the annual actual expenditures, sometimes they go up dramatically, sometimes they go up in small increments, sometimes they go backwards in other areas. And I think Councilor Rivera's question about the actual clean understanding of what's been going on below the surface here is really an interesting and an important question. And it's unfortunate that some of the people who, well, the people who are the key players historically in putting these documents together aren't here today, and I take some responsibility for that, obviously. As a decision of mine was directly responsible for that. But it's just in trying to figure out the change over time strategy or trajectory in this particular budget, it looks different from what we've seen in other departments, and so I share your interest. I share your concern and your interest in trying to decode that. I feel a little, again, sensitive about saying to my new colleague that you have one day to figure this all out. But I think if we can at least add some clarity to it, that would be a good move. Also, just for the record, while we're exploring this particular budget, I really appreciated the comments about the positions that had been lost and the challenges there. I think we continue to struggle with the balance of financial resources and our desire to serve the public, particularly in parks and recreation. We have a very high level of demand because, as Rob said when he started, when I laid out priorities, the Parks and Recreation Department talks directly to all of them, and so the importance of this department is significant and central. And at the same time, it goes in lots of different directions. Some of it relates to what Councilor Harris was talking about when it comes down to, do we have the right garbage cans in the parks? And then we have a great, which is a really granular and important question, And then another question is, are we able to staff up our facilities so that our young people and our families can use them in a way that supports being a family-friendly city? And I think a lot of our ambitions as a city, when it comes to both revenues and expenditures, are really reflected in this particular budget. And the crunch between what we want and what we pay for over time is what we've been hearing about this afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. I wasn't really trying to lay blame on anybody, I think, and I don't expect the city manager to really get together with Mr. Carter and clean up the budget, but I think there are people that have been here long enough that have been working on their particular budget for a long time that he may be able to turn to and say, can you help kind of clean this up?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other direction before we take a vote? Councilor Harris, did you have anything?
Well, this is actually, I think, part and parcel of what the mayor was just saying. I think in the case of Parks and Recreation, for a while now we've been living beyond our means. We just have, in the Chavez Center, we have a facility that has been expensive from day one, and it's in MRC. I mean, we call each of those kind of enterprises, but we also know that we spend a lot of money out of general funds and other sources in order to support them. So, and the discussion about lifeguards is I think, to the point. We've got a tremendous pool, we've got a tremendous resource that we just can't seem to staff it properly, and it seemingly comes down to, for the most part, money. And so how are we going to work that out? I don't know. You can't take it away from community services. You can't take it away from police or fire. Increased revenue, and whether it's just grocery receipts tax or fees, but we can't really raise fees that much either. So I don't know. It's a difficult situation, and I think that kind of this notion of an acknowledgement by the previous city manager and, say, finance director that to a certain extent we're living beyond our means has to do with the reduced budget. Trying to bring it in line. So, anyways, that's an observation. I don't know quite how we're going to get around it.
Okay, any final thoughts, Councilor Romero-Worth? Councilor Lindell?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. I'm going to step out for a minute. Councilor Rivera, if you can get us started on public utilities. Apparently we have to have a discussion, or I have to, with legal regarding the document that was passed out and whether or not we need to make it part of the public record. But I'll take care of that while you take care of the utilities presentation. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to the Public Utilities Division. Shannon, you weren't here earlier, but we'll allow you to make your presentation, and then we'll ask questions after that.
Thank you, Councilor. Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Manager. My name is Shannon Jones. I'm the interim Utility Department Director, also the Wastewater Management Division Director. Unfortunately, Ms. Karen Farina, who represents Utility Billing Customer Service, was not able to be with us, so I will also be filling in for her to the best of my ability. I'd like to start out with the Utilities Division, as it pertains to the three questions posed by the city manager, is a cornerstone for the vision of the city of Santa Fe. From sustainability and our water conservation efforts, our recycling programs that we run, to the solar facilities that we've installed, on many different levels as we plan to a city's ability to stand on a sustainable front and look for years ahead. In addition, for the friendliest city in the world, I would say our utilities actually serve about 84,000 people in our community at some different level. There's not many people that we don't touch their lives on a daily basis. That responsibility we do take very seriously, and we continue to find ways to better serve them through communication, through the services we provide, and also adding sustainability in the utilities that we have, again, for future generations. The last one being a great place to raise a family within the city. I think, again, we're talking about quality of life, from the water we drink to how it's collected. Our environment is protected from our refuse collection to wastewater. There's not many things that we do that don't play into those three core values. And again, it is my belief that we do, I want to say, a tremendous job, but we continue to realize opportunities to do it better, and we continue to face that as opportunities and not as challenges. With that being said, public utilities is comprised of the water, environmental services, wastewater, and utility customer service divisions. I would like to mention that within the budget, the public utilities administration budget and the utility customer service budgets are funded from the other three utilities as enterprise funds. So we provide that funding for their budgets and the services they support. I think a couple of things I would point out is currently the utilities are projecting about $75 million in revenue for the coming years, which is typical that we've seen historically. I would say one of the greatest expenses of the utilities is salaries and benefits. That equates to about $19 million annually. And utility supports about 250 full-time positions within that. To answer the question that Councilor Harris brought forward this morning, had to do with people in acting roles. So I will say, other than the 6 exempt employees that do report to me, that I have communicated are currently working in acting roles until further notice, I would like to focus on a few of those specifically. One is the City of Santa Fe's Public Utilities Department Director, which I stand before you in an acting role in that position. The Water Division Director is currently filled in an acting role by our Water Conservation and Resource Management Section Manager. The Source of Supply Operational Supervisor that runs our Canyon Road Operation Facility is currently filled in an acting role. The Wastewater Management Assistant Plant Superintendent is serving in an acting role and in a dual role for the Wastewater Plant Superintendent position. And the Recycling Collection Supervisor within Environmental Services is also currently filled in an acting role. With that being said, I would like to just highlight a couple of what I would consider significant increases or decreases within the budget. So currently within the Environmental Services budget, you will see that there is an increase of about $800,000. That was in anticipation of an increased tipping fees that would come from our receiving facility. In addition, there is a $300,000 increase for a program to install technology into our environmental services trucks on how we track that work and look for efficiencies. There continued about $600,000 increase as we look to continue to build upon our maintenance program for that fleet within environmental services. And there is an increase of a $1.2 million amount that is being budgeted for replacement of some units within that, within environmental services, which includes a couple of side load trucks and a smaller side load vehicle. Within utility billing, utility customer service division, there is $300,000 increase that really has to do with the communication from the new metering system and how we pay for that service going forward. There is also $650,000 increase to our budgeted amount with anticipation for an upgrade to the utility billing software system. Within wastewater, there's a $350,000 increase for anticipated repairs to a dissolved air flotation, which is our solid thickening unit, and our disc filters that is part of our tertiary treatment. And there's, and within wastewater, there's also a requested $390,000 for the replacement of a Vector unit that serves as part of our collection, our sanitary sewer collection section, the guys that work out in the streets maintaining the infrastructure there. I would like to mention that wastewater will realize a 4.9% rate increase, approved rate increase. January 2019 will be the last of a series of approved rate increases, so they will realize that in January. I don't have a lot of notes on the water, mostly because we did a tremendous amount of work when we looked at the water budget. Ultimately, what you'll see in the recommended budget is about $10 million less than previously requested budgets. But what you will see is it falls a lot more in line with actual expenditures that the division has seen historically. Our approach to zero-based budgeting is actually starting from ground zero, applying things that these are the things that we need to do to provide a level of service and assigning costs to those. With that being said, there are a few exceptions that we do put in place. One that comes to mind is legal services. We do budget amount for legal services with an anticipation that there may be times where water rights have to be negotiated or transferred, or litigation or rulings. There's services that we keep in place as third party to support the city's legal staff. I think typically if you look historically, those have not always been expended through the year, but it has been our intent as a utility to remain active in some of those contracts, and we have included those in the budget as a request to budget those contracts to their full amounts. So with that being said, I will conclude that I do have the other representatives, the other division directors here, and we're more than happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee. Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, Mr. Jones, thank you very much for taking my question seriously. I didn't want to call out the other presenters who didn't seem to have the level of detail that you did. And certainly you've identified, I've lost count, I think 6 or 7, whether it's interim or acting. And I'm sure the mayor is very aware that we want to solidify the organization. Maybe reorganization is fine, however that ends up, but we need to solidify for our personnel. They know where they stand, and I think I have to believe it's high on your list. I'd love to, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, nothing is more important than what you just said. We are working every day to try to address exactly what you pointed out. You and I are in vigorous agreement about the need to not just stabilize the organization, but to provide some clarity and structure and confidence to everybody that the people who are currently interim, temporary, acting, whatever the euphemism is, have the responsibility to move forward. I was amazed when I walked into the mayor's office to get a briefing on day 1 or 2 about just what the level of interimness has been, and we've got to work directly. You and I have talked about this for 5 weeks now, that there's nothing more important than the talent who works for the city and the people who are in leadership positions and the reporting relationships and the management competence, so that the city can move forward and we can address the things that we all care about, which is really getting things done for the people of the city. And until we settle that down and create those assignments, I'm afraid we will continue to have this situation where your question will be received with the same degree of everything is still interim or acting, and that's not a good way to do business.
Right. And of course, I say that, Mayor, not really for your benefit. You know what the situation is. But I'm really saying it for the benefit, certainly, of the people who are acting in those capacities. Mr. Jones, for instance, you know, although I haven't worked a lot with him, I have on a few occasions, and I find him serious, intelligent, and doing the job as best he can. And he's wearing a couple different hats, and I appreciate what Mr. Jones has done in the interim/acting basis for, I don't know, maybe almost a year now. So anyways, but also for our constituents who need to know that that's been kind of an endemic situation within our organization for quite some time. How we got there, I'm not sure, but it's gone on far too long. And so I want people to know we're going to, the entire governing body, the mayor and the council, will work on so we can get that resolved.
I agree, sir. Some of this, I think, I go back to one of the seminal documents which we will be revisiting as a governing body in the not too distant future, and that is the McHarg report. And if you look at the recommendations and the findings that are separate and apart from the financial findings and the findings of accounting practices, I think far more significant is what you're pointing out, Councilor Harris, and that is the management practices and the way in which we have got to build a really first-rate team of managers and then people below them, so that we've really produced a first-rate government body that delivers the services that people want. And it starts with leadership, as you've said over and over again, and it starts with recognizing talent when we have it. I would say this, Councilor Rivera was talking earlier about budgets that are more or less messy, more or less tight. I would just compliment this budget. In my eyes, there may be things you all want to raise as issues, but and I think that's appropriate. I'm not nitpicking that point. I'm simply saying I think when you look at this document, you can see that the team that put this together really is a strong and talented group of people, and to the extent that we sometimes give people criticism, we should equally give people recognition when they have done a really good job of being the kind of management group that we want for the city of Santa Fe.
Very good. So with that, I wanted to talk about environmental services to start, and Ms. Sitton. So because of my role, including my chairmanship on the solid waste agency, I'm very familiar with what's going on in the international marketplace and what that means for our recycling program. We know that the cost of doing business for, I'm going to use the acronym of SWAMA, has gone up in this fiscal year, and this is our relationship with Freedman Recycling. And it's anticipated that it'll go up next year, the cost to SWAMA, and that's obviously a cost to the city as well as the county. I'm not convinced. We didn't get to the point of saying that tipping fees were going to increase. We didn't get to that point, and I'm reluctant, quite frankly, to say that we're going to increase the environmental services budget by really, let's call it 500,000, 480, 500,000, in anticipation of what was happening. I know the SWAMA budget reasonably well. I actually think that the SWAMA has room to move within its budget and could cover, Mr. Kippenbrock will balk a little bit because he doesn't get the reserves quite to where he wants them to, but in terms of operations, he's really in pretty good shape. And so at the level of the joint board with the county, I'm going to be advocating that we not increase the budget for next year within SWAMA, which means that I would not be supporting the anticipated $480,000 increase in the environmental services budget. And now I'll give Ms. Sitton a chance to respond to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris. At the time the budget was due, that was really when the first information was coming out, right. And so that's what we went ahead and put in a placeholder right. for. If it's the pleasure of the council not to have a contingency in case that revenue, that the fees from SWAMA are raised, then that's okay. If we want to leave it there just in case, I would suggest also it might be prudent to try to start setting aside that money for when they do raise the rates, which Mr. Kippenbrock has indicated will be in the next budget year, because we don't really do any kind of a a rate reserve fund, and those are some of the good housekeeping practices that I've talked about. I'd like to start, but it's not critical either way, and we have enough room within our operating budget to absorb a rate increase should it have to come for a while, just as they've absorbed. Eventually we would have to pass it on. So either way, it's the pleasure of the council.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Sitton. And your answer is accurate. This has been coming up for, SOMA's been working on it for a few months now. You're reacting to it, and I think that's smart on your part. But given the discussion last week, and we all have a much better understanding of what is likely to happen and the steps that are going to be taken, I would really advocate that we not build in that $480,000 increase into the environmental services budget in anticipation of a rate increase within SWAMA. If it happens, I can't even see it being in effect until, say, the January 1st. I really don't know. It's being discussed now, but that's one of the points I wanted to make, Chair. So I have so the landfill tipping fees, we've already bumped them by 3%. Plus that does not include the increase of 480,000. Is that correct?
I believe the 480,000 was the only increase we were looking at. I do know that we had a little disagreement with the budget book that just came out this morning. I'm not sure on the $800,000 number.
I guess I'll have to drop back and find that.
My apologies. We do have a 3%.
You do have a 3%. Yeah. So you have a 3% tipping fee or 3% increase in tipping fees already, and so again, that for me was another reason not to build in the $480,000. Again, that's specific to recycling program. I do know that.
My apologies. That's just the landfill tipping fees based on Mr. Kippenbrock's information, with or without the recycling issues.
Right. And those, and the fees are not that. I mean, it really has to do with increased volume, correct?
No, it was an increase to the fees, but again, now Mr. Kippenbrock has indicated that he's going to do a cost of service study, which we are too, and we'll both be using Day Bianchi. So I think that'll all go hand in hand for the next budget year.
So that's proposed a true fee increase. Let's see. Chair, I'm going to turn it over to somebody else so I could find a couple of the things.
Okay, Councilor Lindell, do you have anything?
I don't have anything substantive. I just have a question on page 86, middle of the page on debt service. We went from in the 15-16 from 98 million, and now we're at 6.9. Brad, you can probably just give me that explanation.
Councilor, Chairman, that was the refunding of the water bonds, and we did a lot of refunding back 2-3 years ago, and so that would be the debt service at that point in time. We haven't refunded anything. We did refund a wastewater bond in July of 2016, last fiscal year. I think that was the last refunding.
Okay, Councilor Romero Worth. Councilor Rivera.
Sure. Nice job on the budget there, Shannon, and to the rest of your team. Charlene, since you're up there, so with the whole changes to the recycling, I talked to you a while back about a pay-as-you-throw program. Can you just talk briefly about if that's still going to work, kind of where we're at, and is any of that included in this next fiscal year's budget?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera. We have been looking towards implementing a pay-as-you-throw program for a while. There is some reflection of it in the budget for carts, but again, with a cost of service study scheduled, that'll be one of the things we look at. So if we have 2 or possibly 3 size carts, and to explain what that is, because probably not everybody knows what it is, it's setting residential rates somewhat closer to how commercial works, where commercial rates are based on frequency and volume. So in a way to sort of deliver that incentive to residential customers, we would charge based on the size of trash cart they have. So there would be a ladder of charges. It's not as simple as it sounds, though, because our rates and our budget are based on what we're charging now for 96-gallon carts. So the problem is there would be an expectation maybe on the part of our leaders and our residents that just by going to pay-as-you-throw, we would start with that number and go down. And so if someone wanted, say, a 35-gallon trash cart, that they would pay less than they're currently paying, but then we wouldn't be able to meet our budget numbers. So implementing pay-as-you-throw takes a hard look at where you would set the rates for each size cart. And I feel like over time, since we already have 95-gallon trash carts within the community as a standard, over time I would like to be able to move that standard to 65 gallons. But at the end of the day, that would really be at the rate people are paying now. And as we look at rate increases or how we would implement those pay-as-you-throw rates, we have to make sure we kind of have an idea of how many residents will order what cart and what impact that will be on our budget. And you may remember that just last year we spent well over $1 million on recycling carts. Carts aren't cheap. They're about $55 each, depending on the size, but that's a good average. That's a 65-gallon cart. So we're also looking at a big capital investment to buy carts. So the plan for going to pay-as-you-throw would probably be maybe by zone, or I'm not sure yet, but when we do a cost of service study and come back and sort of say, to you, the governing body, this is the kind of rates we would be looking at, then I think you could make better decisions moving forward.
And just so the new counselors know, the pay-as-you-throw, I'm sure we all know a single mother or maybe an elderly person that lives by themselves who throw 1 or 2 bags of trash in this large container, and then they have to wheel it out, and really for them it's a waste of money. So if it's pay-as-you-throw, you get a smaller cart, you only put 2 bags in it, whereas me, a family of 6 with now boyfriends and everyone coming over, I'm getting ready to order a roll-off here pretty soon.
Make them haul it off.
I'm going to need more than 1 cart. So that's the idea behind there. So thank you, Charlene, for that little update. Shannon, on the Vector unit, I know we purchased a brand new one, a year or 2 ago? Are we purchasing, is this to have 2 Vector units in the city, or is this just to be able to use a new one and then have an adequate backup?
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Rivera, so wastewater, when we look at our asset management, currently our collection system, again, the guys who maintain the infrastructure within the city, the intent is we run actually 5 crews that disperse out through the maintenance areas. Each one of those crews is equipped with a Vector truck and a rotor truck, both of which are fairly expensive pieces of equipment. So what we've done is we've assigned them a 10-year life cycle, which means I'm able to alternate between the 2 pieces of equipment, making sure that each piece of equipment is replaced every 10 years. And so last year we purchased the rotor. The current fiscal year we're in is a rotor truck, and we're budgeting for the Vector truck for next year.
Okay, got it. And then salaries, wages, and benefits. Current budget, 18.9 million. Next year we're looking at 18.7. Are you losing personnel? Because we were told everybody's getting a 2% increase. So wondering how you went down instead of up.
Chairman, councilors, I'm thinking maybe that's where the $200,000 that was the previous discussion maybe came in. I apologize, I can't speak to that. There's a formula that where the number of positions get put into an allocation that creates those salaries and benefits numbers. Other than that I do look at it, is it the right number of employees? Are they pushed into the formulas? I probably can't speak any more in depth on that. But we're not losing any employees, no.
I don't know if finance can answer that. If they're not losing any employees, don't say anything about vacancies, because
We're not buying it.
Yeah. We did do the personnel budget differently this year. This year, the finance department took between the departments didn't get to see the personnel budgets. It was done between HR and finance. And basically a file was created about the end of March of all the positions within the city that were filled with their rates of pay and their benefit calculations. And then that was uploaded into OpenGov. And so while I uploaded the file, I can't speak to the detail of any one personnel proposal, but I can get into it and look at the number of bodies or employees and the benefits to make sure that the count was the same.
So
There's a significant change in the way we did personnel budgeting this year.
so if everyone was getting a 2% increase, that should have gone up from last year's budget.
That's correct.
But it didn't.
It didn't. I see that.
Okay.
Anything else, Councilor Rivera?
That's all I have for now.
Okay, Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Jones, this is a question for you, and this has to do, and I'm not going to pull it up. It's too hard to kind of sort around, but leasing, lease payments for the wastewater facility, which is on airport ground. I think I've got a number here somewhere of $426,000. Either that's revenue on the airport side or expense on your side. Can you tell us where this stands? Because, as you know, this is something that's been known for a while. I think even FAA really wants us to kind of distinguish between wastewater property and aviation property. So fill us in on this, and I understand that an appraisal is in hand for this transaction.
Chairman, Council Harris. Mr. Chairman, this will not be vanilla. So there's a couple moving pieces. One, the wastewater management division is in possession of over a 1 megawatt solar array that is located on airport property. So the airport does realize revenue from a lease through the controlling firm for that solar, for that photovoltaic system. So the airport does see that. And that's been historically that you do realize that revenue. The second part of that is you are correct that wastewater currently occupies what I call two pieces of property that the airport would take position with. One is our solids land application field, which surrounds that photovoltaic system. And so it's been probably a couple of months, but working with the airport manager, there is an intent that I believe there is a lease that could be executed for that portion. The reason I say that is because, again, I have ambition of detaching from that property. So I'd be looking at a short-term lease as we look at our solids disposal plan. What's not short-term is the wastewater treatment plant facility itself. And so currently that sits on, and I apologize if I mix up the numbers, but I'm going to say maybe about 56 acres is the parcel that we sit on, of which about 60 to 65% of it is identified as airport property. We did talk early on about leasing the property, but again, I do not anticipate that wastewater treatment plant is going to relocate, and I feel it would be in the best interest of my division that we purchase that property and not lease it. The airport is amenable to that, which triggered the appraisal that was done. And so even on that, I would not be opposed to, again, moving forward with the purchase of that property. On a personal note, I did have some strategic questions on the actual appraisal that was done. And is it representative of or the comparables that were looked at? But again, it's not something that would stop the process, meaning if that were ready to go forward, the wastewater division would honestly be interested in buying property that the wastewater plant resides on.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think this is something that needs to be accomplished. Really, I'm looking at you, Mr. Litzenberg, and certainly the mayor and Mr. Bush. We've heard Mr. Jones, his capacity as acting public utilities director. This has been out there for a while. I think that it's probably safe to say, maybe, I don't know, I hesitate at that wastewater has the resources to purchase it. And I'm talking money. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done at wastewater. I think you have the resources. And there's also a lot of work to be done at the airport. And although I'm fairly familiar with what they have, I also know where their gaps are too. And I think that this is a transaction that could clean things up in terms of ownership, and also help the airport and the aviation division move forward on some of the things they're trying to accomplish. So again, let's get the appraisal in hand, kind of review what Mr. Jones said, if there's some comps that really don't quite make sense, and let's just bring the parties together. This should be, I would think, a relatively straightforward conversation, and I don't see why it should linger too long. It's been around for a while. And just a little footnote, you probably know, Mr. Litzenberg, of the police firing range on the airport property. FAA and the occasional passenger, as they pull into the airport and hear that gunfire or ordnance being exploded, thinks that something's going on. And there's a lot going on at the airport these days, but that's not an activity we want to broadcast. So let's put that on your list too, if we could. And that's been around as a discussion even longer than the wastewater. So I really do want to get that one, these two issues resolved. Again, I probably have some other questions, but I do appreciate the work and that you're doing, Mr. Jones. I think utility department as a whole, it's my observation, whether it's environmental services, wastewater or water, I think things work pretty well. We got the utility billing situation. I didn't mention that, but we got that under control. So I think we're definitely well along with really utilities being one of our best departments. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Harris. I just wanted to take a moment to compliment you on the budget, Mr. Jones. When I was going through my budget book this weekend and I got to public utilities, I actually made a note that this was pretty good. I like the narrative. There was a lot of detail with the different, the training, the contracts, and then other than the concerns that Councilor Rivera raised regarding the salaries, wages, and benefits, and that's, I think, a broader discussion that we need to have, or information that needs to be brought forward. I just, again, thank you. You obviously have a good handle on things over there, even though you're just in an acting capacity. You've got a good staff. I can see that. And again, I just wanted to compliment you on a job well done on your budget. You and your entire department. I know it's not just you, it's your staff that's with us this afternoon. So thank you. And with that, I'll entertain a motion regarding the public utilities budget. Councilor Harris.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to move that we approve an amended budget for the Public Utilities Department. That amendment would eliminate the anticipated increase for environmental services of $480,000.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? A second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, passes. Before we adjourn, I just want to let the committee know that the document that was passed out by the Parks and Rec Department, although we didn't adopt it, it will have to be included in the minutes. So it will be, we'll forward it to our minute taker and will be included. So that concludes our budget hearings for today. Thank you very much. Yes.
I just wanted to note that last week, Fitch Rating Agency upgraded the wastewater debt from AA to AA+, and the water utility was rated, their rating of AA+ by Fitch was affirmed. the water utility is also AAA by Standard & Poor's.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, we're adjourned. Have a good night. Thank you.